So, good morning. Hope everyone grabbed coffee and croissants. I'm really happy that so many of you came here so early this morning to this spectacular place. We were a bit afraid yesterday evening over dinner if there would be probably 5 people here, and now it's, I think, 80 to 90. It's really great. My name is Katja Pahl, and I welcome you as chair of Fritz-Schumacher-Gesellschaft. In this Hamburg Summer of Architecture, we focus all our events on topics that are currently relevant in Hamburg. And at the same time, we believe that it is important to always look beyond the confines of Hamburg. We are also doing this in the spirit of Schumacher, who, with a very international background, was very well connected beyond the borders of Hamburg and also of Germany, and was involved in international discourse. Among other things, he was an honorary member of the Royal Institute of British Architects. We are particularly international this morning, with this event, which is a cooperation of the Fritz-Schumacher-Gesellschaft with the Behörde für Stadtentwicklung and Wohnen, represented here today by Tobias Goevert, and the Architecture Foundation London. We are very delighted that Ellis Woodmann came over from London for this event. Thank you very much, Ellis. Last year, the Architecture Foundation initiated a film series about Hamburg. In several videos, current architectural and urban development projects are presented. And together with the Department of Urban Development and Housing, we produced a film for this series. Under the title Planning Hamburg, ideas, projects, and plans for Hamburg are discussed. And you can all watch the film series from home on the Architecture Foundation's YouTube channel. You find a little postcard on your seats with the links. And you will get a sneak peek at the film Planning Hamburg right away to set the mood for the discussion. Today's event is titled Perspectives on Hamburg from Abroad, and I'm very pleased that we have succeeded in inviting really top-class guests to look at Hamburg together with us. Welcome to Anne Fonteyne from noAarchitecten from Brussels and Tom Emerson from 6A Architects from London. Welcome to Hamburg. Before our 2 guests give you an insight into their Hamburg projects, we now have the opportunity to briefly view excerpts from the film Planning Hamburg, which provide a brief overview of the currently relevant planning issues in Hamburg, and hopefully make you all want to watch the film afterwards. Planning Hamburg was filmed and co-conceived by Jan Lewandowski, who is also behind the camera right now over there. And many thanks, Jan, for your truly tireless efforts for this film. It was a pleasure to do that together with you. Thank you very much.
Also die Stadt Hamburg hat über mehr als 100 Jahre immer Acht auf sich gegeben und man ist immer voll großer Erwartung eigentlich, obwohl man die Bilder, die einem dann da begegnen, ja bekannt sind, und trotzdem lässt einen das auch nach unendlich vielen Malen nicht so richtig kalt.
Hamburg hat über Jahrhunderte einen Erfolg im Hafen gesehen. Und die Herausforderung hier in Hamburg war, zu beweisen, dass ein Hafen nicht funktionslos geworden ist, sondern ein Hafen sich ebenso auch weiterentwickelt. Und trotzdem die Chance zu ergreifen, dies in einer Koexistenz zu machen und damit auch eine Qualität für Hamburg zu generieren, die allen zur Verfügung steht.
Es sind relativ breite und große Straßen, die sich in den kommenden Jahren ja verändern werden und vor dem Klimawandel auch darauf reagieren werden, dass wir in einem Hitzefeld stehen. Und deswegen gibt es hier jetzt einen ganz großen Shift von dieser Monofunktionalität zu einer Vielzahl von Nutzungen. Und da spielt eben auch die Hafen City, diese Durchlässigkeit wiederherzustellen zu diesen historischen Gebieten, eine große Rolle.
Das ganze Blech, was man hier sieht, es kommt alles weg. Diese großen Platanen, die bleiben. Das ist wie so eine neue Zeitschicht.
Im Grunde genommen ist die Entwicklung eines komplett neuen Stadtteils eine einzigartige Chance, die man so als Planer in dem Maßstab nie wieder bekommen wird. Und dass man jetzt hier aber wirklich bei Null ansetzen kann, ist einmalig.
Und für mich ist es eines der spannendsten Aufgaben, die man sich vorstellen kann, so einen neuen Stadtteil mit allen Freiräumen mitten in einer großartigen Kultur- und Naturlandschaft hier planen zu dürfen.
Wir bauen derzeit neue Quartiere am Rande der Stadt, auch in einer Dimension, wie wir uns das bis vor kurzem gar nicht zugetraut hätten. Also auf der einen Seite ist es durchaus das Wachsen nach außen, auch dem ganzen sozialen Anspruch, der ja dahinter steckt, dem nochmal nachzugehen und fragen, kann unsere Planergeneration da nochmal einen nennenswerten Beitrag leisten?
Ich denke, es ist wichtig, dass die Menschen wieder Orte haben, an denen sie sich begegnen können, an denen mehr Lebendigkeit stattfindet. Und ich freue mich, wenn in Hamburg eben auch mal wieder Kinder groß werden in der Hamburger Innenstadt.
Die Magistralen, da ist die Stadt schon gebaut und mehr als der Entwurf eines neuen Stadtteils auf weißem Papier geht es hier ja eher darum, die Stadt weiter und umzubauen. Für mich verkörpern sie so eine Art überraschenden Urbanismus. Da passieren Sachen, die man sonst gar nicht erwartet.
Auch wenn es eine der schwierigsten planerischen Aufgaben überhaupt ist, würde ich sagen, sich zu überlegen, wie man diese Straßen besser fassen kann, ist es für uns einfach eins der ganz, ganz wichtigen Ziele in der Stadtentwicklung.
2050, da würde ich behaupten, in der Innenstadt wohnen wieder mehr Menschen. Wir werden eine viel größere Nutzungsvielfalt haben, vielleicht auch eine größere Kleinteiligkeit. Wir werden neue Immobilien haben, die dieses Thema der Mischung auch baulich sozusagen dem nochmal einen Ausdruck geben. Ich glaube, wir werden eine Vielzahl auch von Plätzen neu gestaltet haben und wir werden dem Radfahrer und dem Fußgänger mehr Flächen zur Verfügung stellen. Die Innenstadt wird noch besser verknüpft sein mit den angrenzenden Lagen. Die Hafen City wird selbstverständlicher Teil der Hamburger Innenstadt sein. Insgesamt bin ich sehr optimistisch, was die Weiterentwicklung der Hamburger Innenstadt betrifft. Diese grüne Stadt am Wasser wird Hamburg immer sein und viele dieser sehr vertrauten Bilder dieser Stadt, die werden auch in 30 Jahren sozusagen Konsistenz haben.
Now I'm very happy to hand over to Ellis Woodmann for the discussion and the introduction of our guests.
Am I on? I am. Hello, my name is Ellis Woodmann. I'm the director of the Architecture Foundation in London. Thank you, Katja, and not least for the collaboration on this project, this film series, which we've produced together, which would have been completely impossible without the help of Katja and also Toby. Just to give a little bit of context for the film series that we've produced. The Architecture Foundation is a small London-focused organisation that runs a public programme around architecture and the built environment. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we had to close all of that down and move online in a very emphatic way. And we sort of accidentally found ourselves running this global television station, by making films which were broadcast freely on YouTube. And the Hamburg series is the third of a number of series that we've made about different cities. And it's always, as I say, the Architects Foundation's ambitions are directed towards cultivating a conversation about the future of London. Why look to another city? I think London can often be quite a parochial environment, and for me, the key ambition of these series has really been to introduce to a predominantly UK audience other kinds of planning culture and other kinds of attitudes and approaches to city making. So we've made the first one, which Anne previously contributed to, was about Antwerp, and there's a series also about Bordeaux. But I think for me, Hamburg felt like an absolutely obvious inclusion, because in a sense that I think there's always one or two cities which feel like they're at the center of the current architectural discourse. Maybe in the 80s it was Berlin, in the 90s perhaps Barcelona, places where new approaches were being tried out, and there was a level of sophistication and a kind of generosity to the contributions of people from other places. And Hamburg feels like that to me at the moment, that it's somewhere that, certainly from a London perspective, we look at with some jealousy. I'm sure it's not as rose-tinted. My perspective is perhaps more, a little rose-tinted compared with yours, but it's the sophistication and generosity of the planning culture feels quite special. And I think that's reflected in the quality of the architects that are interested in working here at the moment from other places, and their reasons for coming to try and build specifically in Hamburg. So we're going to have short presentations from Anne and from Tom, and then we're also joined by Toby Goevert from is an old friend from London, newly repatriated to Hamburg, but was previously in the mayor's office in London, so he knows the London situation as well. But I think the ambitions for today maybe are to talk a little about the cultural differences between here and some of the environments that our speakers are more familiar with, work with more consistently, and what they understand as the kind of special opportunities of working in this place. So we're going to hear first from Tom Emerson, who's the co-founding partner of 6A Architects, which was founded in 2001, in London. And I think absolutely one of the kind of defining practices, British practices of their kind of generation, that have developed an extraordinary body of work, particularly focused around the reuse of existing buildings. Tom is kind of, in parallel with his work at 6A, has had a very distinguished teaching career and has recently completed a period as Dean of the School of Architecture at ETH in Zurich. And we catch him newly elevated with the Tessenow Medal. Steph MacDonald, Tom's partner, and Tom were last week awarded the Tessenow Medal in London. I think some of the people involved with that prize may be here today. Anne Fonteyne, kind of an architect who founded noAarchitecten with Jitse van den Berg and Philippe Véran in 1999, having previously worked in London in the office of David Chipperfield Architects. And again, a practice, I think, for which the reuse of existing fabric has been a kind of fundamental theme, and maybe is part of the reason why you're involved in this city. I think practice, noA, which is based in Bruges and in Brussels, has recently completed a project, Hetstein, on the waterfront in Antwerp, which I really think is one of the most significant projects that we'll see kind of built anywhere in Europe, completed anywhere in Europe, kind of this year, on a very kind of dramatic site on the waterfront, reworking historic buildings which dramatically transformed in the 19th century with a very challenging restoration and reinterpretation of an existing fabric. And you also have the not insignificant project at the moment of the canal in Brussels, which I know you're working on with Surgeon Bates Architects, which is the site of the former Citroën car factory in, I think near Molenbeek in Brussels, which is going to be basically being transformed into an arts institution of a epic scale. Maybe, I think you said there was a 400-meter long elevation that you're currently restoring. To all the way around. Okay. So I think 2025, that should be appearing. Okay. I think in terms of our running order, Tom, do you want to kick off? Because I know that the project that you've completed in this city, I think, dates from 2015 at the design, and then Anne's going to talk about some more recent schemes.
Thank you, Ellis and Katja. Thank you all for coming this morning so early, and it's very nice. It's very, very nice to be here. I hope that the case I will make is that the channel between London and Hamburg is very much open and has been for a very long time and continues to be. In fact, as Ellis mentioned, last week we were hosting the Tessenau Society in London and in Cambridge, and having a really nice exchange. And I think that to some extent maybe is the main theme of the talk, is that we love ports. We love harbours, we love ports, we love port cities. We especially like cities in which the port and the harbour just is part of everyday life. I think maybe everybody in this room knows where this is. But I think that we were the only people in the restaurant absolutely amazed by what was going on in the kind of background of a rather kind of nice bourgeois moment. And we also come from a port city, an estuary city. This is London from the air. And port cities, maybe they have something in common in that they're places where stuff goes in and stuff comes out at incredible rates. And there's a sort of openness, maybe, which is very particular, and that's maybe what I'd like to show. So, and they also kind of have certain design and material habits. This is, and also moments of kind of kitsch. In London, you find these ships on top of buildings, pubs, churches, somehow always pointing to the outside. And then in the fish restaurant, you get the fish kind of impaled by the lamp. It's quite nice when cities sort of declare themselves in their small moments as well as the big moments. We've also been working in lots of other port cities. In New York, we've just finished a project which more or less coincides with the project we did here in terms of time frame, which also kind of contains that sense of kind of arrival and departure. This was for a contemporary art foundation in West Village, which kind of is a reuse project, which is very bricky, in which the geology of the city is very much part of its architecture, and you get these kind of granite bollards. New York, Manhattan is is a pile of granite. And then you find it in small places all over the city, and not least in our building at the entrance, which then we played again in the small moments of the building, where these kind of moments of geology or geography then become kind of social moments. This is my partner, Steph, making little seats out of those kind of corners. Then we're also working in Liverpool, another incredible port city, which I think has the kind of echo chamber to Hamburg is quite striking in its materiality and in its kind of trading culture. And also the kind of the monumentality of its industrial infrastructure. This is the Albert Dock. Of course, now it's also a site of very contested histories, and the colonial past, particularly the part it played in slavery, is now very much part of the subject of the city. And all of that is inscribed in an incredible material culture. Like the way in which the city's made in Liverpool actually reminds me a lot of walking around in Hamburg, in terms of that very kind of confident sense of what it is and how it's made. And these are some rather amazing pictures by James Stirling, actually, in the late 40s, who actually was the one who converted this building into Tate, Liverpool, in the mid-80s. Now we're doing another refurbishment of his refurbishment and opening up the building, these big brick warehouses, not nearly at the scale of Canal, but also opening in 2025. So get your cultural boots on. It's part of a riverside, a kind of whole riverside development, which I think I just show this because it is completely the antithesis of Hamburg, in the sense that it's a very, very long harbour front, and there is no master planning. There is no idea. It's just things. There's some amazing warehouses. There's a new stadium. There's a new conference centre. There was a kind of new park in the 80s. There's the Museum of Liverpool. All these things sort of dropped in from out of space, and then it lost its World Heritage status. No surprise. We're also working in Malmö. This is a competition we won earlier this year. Also a kind of a port city, also a city on the water, of comings and goings, and this is in a kind of old cement factory with these kind of old silos, which are part of a new ecology. And of course, ecology is absolutely part of these port cities too. These are some pictures of London, where we're from, the scent of the river being kind of present kind of everywhere. And the scent of the river and the riverbed, the clay, like Hamburg, it's a city that is not entirely made of brick, but brick is its kind of defining character, you could say. And that's something that we found also to be true in Hamburg. So going back to another estuary, this time in Hamburg, and how do these two cities talk to each other? And how do you make a building in this place? And of course, we were looking at the brick architecture and to make a project in brick. But of course, brick is fundamentally different in Hamburg than in London. In Hamburg, brick is incredibly plastic and sculptural. In fact, last night at dinner, Anne described brick in Hamburg as being, you did this gesture, which I think probably maybe everybody understands. It's a kind of way of laying bricks which is very, very dynamic and sculptural. And this is something which is kind of totally fascinating to us, but also completely foreign to the way London does brick. And in fact, here we have on the left a bit of Hamburg brickwork and a bit of London brickwork in Spitalfields, so 18th century. And in London, brickwork is flat. It's just flat. It's about a surface. And it very, very rarely moves out of plane. Even when it's nearly flat, it's never completely flat in Hamburg, whereas in London, and this is in Bedford Square, so a very sort of smart upmarket development, it's still incredibly flat. And anything that's not in that plane is of another material. And even in the sort of, you could say, the planar moments, I mean, look at that cornice there, and then the bend in the brickwork, the door opening versus kind of this sort of, you know, occasionally London does try to get a little bit fancy with brickwork. And then we just kind of, well, we just get it wrong, don't we? So what we wanted to do with our building was really to do something which was kind of a piece of background, this idea of brickwork being essentially like a canvas for our buildings and really play on that flatness. And our buildings are just over there, about 5 minutes walk. The main aspect of the master plan, which is maybe was important to us, it was a master plan by Kees Christiansen's company, and was that in the water and in the future, there will be these buildings standing in the water. And they are going to be, you could say, much more exotic kind of creatures. And so we thought we would just go full background with our project. So that's the two buildings, and then you can see the bridge, and actually the competition entries for those water towers are in the hall over there. I just saw them a few moments ago. And so this is a prototype. We would go dark and we would go flat, and we would really go into the texture of these bricks. And interestingly, as you know, if you've specified bricks, you're always playing with all the different types and availability, supply chains. And it turned out that the brick that we had specified, this is going back nearly 10 years, so I'm trying to remember it exactly, but the brick that we specified wasn't available, and then we had to use a cheaper one that was a little bit smaller. And the builder and the developer were concerned that it wouldn't, you know, the setting out wasn't correct. But we thought, oh no, that's fine, because we'll just have a bit more mortar, and the mortar joints will get a bit bigger, so the thing will be a bit less precise, which of course makes us from London feel very comfortable, and I think some people here rather uncomfortable. But so the mortar joints would just loosen up the surface. And in the end, we really enjoyed this kind of slightly kind of imprecise form. And then we returned to London in terms of the composition, this is a very typical Georgian facade, base with a shop. It's actually where we did a contemporary art centre in London. And then you get very tall windows on the first floor, slightly smaller on the second floor, and smaller still on the top floor. And almost every building of this type has a variation of this composition. But we decided we wanted to just turn this upside down for our building and have the small windows nearer the ground, so for more privacy in the housing, and then make them grow in size as the building gets taller and as the kind of views over the city and the estuary expand. So our buildings are essentially kind of repeating elevations. This is the competition entry. And then this is the actual thing. And it was there were buildings that were finished during the lockdowns. And so we didn't get to see them. We saw them at the beginning of the construction site, but not towards the end, and certainly not when they were finished. And actually, this photograph by Hannes Heitmuller, who's here, I saw one picture on Instagram, and I thought, oh my God, that looks like our building. I was like, oh, it is our building. And so we sent Hannes a message and saying, really love this photo. Have you got any others? And he went, yeah, I've got quite a few. So anyway, so completely virtually, we hooked up, and and we got the pictures that we're going to show you today, which we really love, especially since they sort of came out of the ether. The plan itself, I'm not going to go into. I think that the only kind of important thing to us was maybe the corners and the idea of the loggia. We're really keen not to kind of put equipment on the outside of the building, to keep it really inboard, partly for climatic reasons, wind and protection, but partly also just to keep the building kind of inside itself and keep its expression really sort of inside. And we had done it a few years before in London on this little housing scheme in North London, which is basically defined by these kind of loggias that sort of look down, up and down different areas. And then here in Hafen City, they are on every corner and they kind of march down the building until they meet the base. And then from within, you have this little kind of enclosed room that looks out. Initially, this is a project where you win and lose different challenges, which we'll probably talk about in a moment. But one of them was the balconies, which we wanted. Here they're in steel, pressed steel. We wanted them to be in cast iron. Cast iron is the second material of a port city after brick. It is the material in which all the kind of working stuff is made. And it's from infrastructure, drain covers, pipes, but it's also the decorative. In London, this is, again, this building in Spitalfields. And we have used it on facades, and that's the back of that same building. Is a cast iron facade, and then we used it in Mayfair again for a project for Paul Smith. And it's amazing material, apart from being really, really tough and really good. You can also kind of, it's very plastic, you can kind of draw in it and make certain shapes. So we wanted that lower part of the building to be cast iron so that it would sort of, and even bits of the ground and so on. Anyway, that didn't work. That didn't happen, but then from a distance, it doesn't matter. What is nice, though, is that the gardens have started to come, and that's something that's very important in our work, is the relationship to landscape. This is a project in Milton Keynes, and that it either contributes to or generates its own landscape at a smaller scale. Our projects often contain gardens, rainwater collection for gardens and for German clients. And it's amazing how quickly they grow. This is 2016. This is about a month ago, and even the house for the electric car is now buried. It's about seasons. It's about kind of enclosure. So that's a really kind of important part of all our work, increasingly, in fact. So we were absolutely delighted when this garden emerged. This is actually the roof of the ramp going into the car park, which is sort of somehow sort of pushes out under the building. So it has this rather sort of strange astroturf moment, which I actually quite like, and kids really love it, apparently. It's sort of very steep, and they kind of roll down. But never mind, it's all part of kind of making a project in the city. And then finally, those other little details, you know, the planning of housing and different plan types obviously puts in these irregularities into it, which we quite enjoy. So like these sort of special corners with smaller windows, which of course borrows again directly from the habit in London of blind ends kind of having an echo of windows, which is often attributed to what they call the window tax. In fact, it's not. It's actually, they were designed to be like that. The window tax was very small in its impact. But nevertheless, this is the building. We hope it's got a good presence. We hope it actually provides a nice background to these kind of water towers and also the riverfront. We've done a bunch of other projects in Hamburg, or other competitions. I think they might be here. Maybe top marks if you can spot them. None of them have come off yet, but we're very pleased to have done this one, and we hope that we'll be doing some more. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Also from my side, very impressed with Architekturkultur in Hamburg, breakfasts. It's something we can only dream of, I think, elsewhere. Phone calls from Hamburg. is my short contribution to being involved with the city, let's say on a personal level, since a very long time, but as an architect, only very recently. As 2 years ago, a first call came to reflect on a project in the city. And my talk to you took it as an occasion, now having worked for 2 years on 3 projects in the city, to use this moment as a kind of reflection, probably also as much for ourselves as for you to share with you. So I'm talking, as Ellis said, for representing here our office called noAarchitecten in Brussels. So also representing everyone working on this project. City of Hamburg, that's how I started to step back and reflect with an aerial photograph, something you know very well. And I started to locate the projects that we've been working on. One is on Holstenwall, the first one. Second one is Klöpperhaus, next to Hauptbahnhof. And the third one is close to Berliner Tor. And when I did this, of course, I was really surprised, wondering if there would be a number 4 or 5, and they would stay on that same line. This line, the horizontal line is, of course, kind of surprising, but what was less surprising is that there's also a link between the buildings, they're all existing buildings, and their position in relation to the city. And both Holstenwall and Klöpperhaus are kind of related to, I think, the walling or the line, the border of what at a certain moment was called Neustadt. While the third one in Hammerbrook, of course, immediately shows already an interest in expanding the city and the city life and the diverse uses and peoples that were referred to before to a larger area of the city. So these projects are less related to the port and the river, but more, I think, to the sort of historic growth and future ideas of what the city should become. And of course, Klöpperhaus is also related to the very old part, the Altstadt. It's a little bit abstract here, but which was, of course, defined by the Alster and the Elbe and compacted, had its natural borders, let's say, more than the Neustadt. As said, these are 3 existing buildings, and to put on a bit more pressure, 2 of them have been designed and built by Fritz-Schumacher-Gesellschaft. Of course, one of the architects that had put most of, or contributed most to that brick city that we all have come to know and are very impressed by. So touching a Fritz-Schumacher building, I can tell you it doesn't come lightly. So I'll start maybe with Holstenwall, building from the 80s by Kleffel-Koenholt Architekten, now known as KPW, that was introduced to us with a phone call saying, we have a problem. The problem is that this building, built in the 80s for the HASPA, Hamburger Sparkasse, somehow is also a building that is really rooted in its time, as it represents one company and has this, I think you all know it, or there's a number of buildings of these architects with that language in the city. Quite interesting. But here, the foyer, the glass foyer, the glass staircase tower were all there to represent the HASPA as becoming an emblem for that company. And the result was that with the HASPA moving out, it was very difficult to find new tenants. So the building has been probably as much empty, or as long it has been empty as it has been used before. Part of the difficulty is also this called Wimmelhaus, built also in the 80s, but referring strongly to two buildings on each side of this road, probably one of the Magistralen, I was wondering. One of the big roads, no? It's not a Magistrale? Okay. Through the city, from west to east, back. And these two pavilions really marked this entrance to Neustadt as a gate, as a tour. It was reconstructed in the 80s, and when you look well, it's really reconstructed as a decor of something that actually has nothing to do with what it represents. It's completely isolated from public space. It's all about an image of what a building could be or could do. Looking at this old map with older Bahnhof here, 1830, we see the location we are talking about now is here, and you see these two little pavilions starting the entrance to that newly defined city, Neustadt, with Wallanlagen around it. Something that, of course, today we still recognize very well. And you see that in the 19th century then, it also became, from a fortification, a place of flânerie, where people would go, would meet. There was also markets. And you see to the left and the right of this image, this Wimmelhaus representation with a Millantor entering the city. And we'll see a number of images where you still recognize here, and then today here, the two sister buildings with this former Haspa. And the Wallanlagen with this Heiligengeistfeld in front of it, as really still a very strong border to entering the city. The lineup of buildings along that built line of the Holstenwall is also very much embedded in the brick tradition, but it's also very institutional buildings, symmetrical facades, large-scale buildings. And you can see at the bottom then the collage-like building that was added at the end. And the first question, there has been, I think, at least one competition round on the site, and then things went wrong, and we're not so informed of everything, but there's a big history about it. So the first question was to make a new building on that site, which we took on sort of very enthusiastically, looking at different volumetries. I could show you like many versions of different heights, different fragmentations. And of course, Tom already showed very similar images. The question for us that came was immediately one of working with brick, and probably a bit different than your discourse of relating it to London brickwork. We were extremely intrigued by finally being able to do this, stack bricks on top of each other and maybe bring in a kind of handwerk or thinking in brick that for many reasons in Belgium, which is also a very brick-based country, has not been possible. So we started looking at different orders until looking again at that long line and in close context and contact and meetings with the city, the question of symmetry was brought back on the table. And as you see to the right, the existing building is symmetrical. The new one was now asked to become symmetrical. We decided to actually not make a new building, but look at how the existing building with its existing structure could contribute to a new type of architecture. We can discuss the new. Where it could become a multi-tenant building, different companies using it with activated ground floors, a Wimmelhaus that could become a public building, and the roofs that could be activated similarly. So many studies happened to see how to put one brick on top of the other, how to start a building at the base, finish it at the top. Making models to understand what that could be. And one of the sort of main ideas also was that we would not use a specially formed brick. You know, we walked around the city looking at all these expressions where it was just using simple bricks. And by turning them, stacking them, the plastics would come in. So you see in model a lot of testing out, trying to understand also how this new big dress could look and should look, and getting carried away probably by moments, to end in a proposal now that will be soon built. We're still waiting for the permit, but they're already dismantling the existing building. And where you also see, I think it goes on a bit, that in yellow, keeping that existing building means taking away also its very specific shape from the outside. Of course, one of the questions, it's a private development, is always to make it more efficient, meaning more surface. But to see how we can, with the red now, engage with these shapes and bring in the old facades within the interior and still have a sort of coexistence of the old building within the new, newly dressed volume. Moving to Lederschüler, of course, comes with another question. Are you interested? It's a more regular one. There will be a competition. Are you interested? Which, looking at this old image, we definitely were. It's a Fritz-Schumacher building from the 1920s. It's not a contour house, but a factory where the design of Fritz-Schumacher here was very much influenced by, not New York, by Chicago. Steel construction, big spans, but also by the Amsterdam school. So also Fritz-Schumacher went abroad to look at how others dealt with brickwork, facades, construction. So it was really sort of factory floors, which started with the leather factory, but also in this image here you saw they moved on to making false teeth. Yeah. And that factory idea we found really interesting. This is more or less how the building looks today, and this is also what probably most of you have read. So the Lederschülerhaus in Hamburg muss abgerissen werden. I think 2 independent studies looked into the building and its structure to come to the same conclusion. The steelwork cannot be saved, and the foundations of the building are too weak. So a restoration is sort of out of the question. Bringing, of course, a totally new question to how to replace this very iconic building that many, many people in the city care about with a new one. Apparently, it's so sensitive that I was asked not to show the project. So I'll just tell you a little bit. We were interested in, thinking it as a new gate from Hammerbrook to the city or out. A place, of course, of encounter where it's always been a place of different clubs, both on ground floor and in the basement. It has an important music scene, history. It has a factory background, so we try to bring in these different functions and notions. Again, think of an iconic ensemble. It's a bigger building now. And rather than reconstructing the idea of Fritz-Schumacher's hugely plastic brick mound icon, we thought of linking to his way of trying innovative ways of building. Of course, as of today, we all know new building has to have very, very good reasons, and we should start thinking about which and how we build with which materials. And we teamed up with a colleague of both Tom and I from the ETH Zurich, Philippe Bloch, who is developing this system of floor plates that use endless material, but can also be disassembled and reassembled, in future occasions of change. It's a system that is now fully under development. And also there, although I think by selecting our project for future development now, it became very clear that especially German building regulations and testing out new ways of constructing might not yet be in sync, you know. So although we were really interested in pushing factory, large-scale, assembling, disassembling structures, it proves now for the developer, our client, that it might be an obstacle, actually, to move forward with the project, because it might take too much time to have it all tested and regulated. A last image, we, for that site, also decided to move away from brick. Some of you might know these kind of factory buildings in the Schaumburger Straße where they made use of this emailliert, I would say, ceramics, which are also much lighter than brick and could fit also in the idea of cladding and uncladding, undressing a building. To end with a Klopperhaus, and this was the weirdest call. Can we meet tomorrow? An email about the Klopperhaus, I think you all know, next to the Hauptbahnhof, and until recently a building that was used by Kaufhof, until everything that in many big cities is department store was bound to disappear. I think the pandemic has been mentioned now in many different contexts, but was the final hit. And this Klopperhaus is located really next to the Hauptbahnhof, but also has its links, obviously, to the Kontorhausviertel. And our project is both working on the listed, obviously, Klopperhaus, and the parking garage next to it, which will also disappear, or which will disappear. And there we have been pushing hard to bring in, also mentioned before, more housing, places to live in the city. Quite an impressive image of this dense architectural expression of the Kontorviertel. And we tried also with the two buildings now activating the ground floor, bringing in new housing in what we call the Atelier House, and then a little bit of it also in the Klopperhaus to make that a new public building. What is interesting about the history of the Klopperhaus is, of course, that it's on that edge between the Kontorhausviertel, but also the Mönckebergstraße, the shopping high street of Hamburg. And it was in the 60s that after the building had been built for Herr Klapper, who was a wool manufacturer and trader, it was sold in the 60s to Kaufhof. Kaufhof wanted to demolish the building, which of course has been prevented strongly by heritage interests. Now it's listed. But you see that it is really interlinked both through the basement with the Hauptbahnhof, with Saturn, but also is part of that high street life in the city. Until, these are images made last summer, the Kaufhof disappeared, and walking around in an empty department store is something like walking around in a film set. It's very, very weird experience, not knowing whether people will move in or have just moved out, and so many things becoming totally obsolete. It happens also across the street, the former Karstadt Sport, same situation, although it has a sort of very engaging, fantastic roof. I guess many of you have been there. You see the Klopperhaus roof of a very different kind in the background. And that's also interesting that this former Karstadt, now called Jupiter, next to Saturn, of course, has become really a building that people engage with in temporary uses, testing out what the city should and could become, while the Klopperhaus, probably through its architecture, is much less somehow open to that, and has been bought by Tishman Speyer, American developer, who, after asking a number of firms whether we can talk tomorrow, has decided to work with us and AGN, our partner in Hamburg, on this project together. So you see, I'll just run through a number of images. The original floor plans of Fritz-Schumacher, where you have a 6.3 grid that nicely is repeated at the center, and had not the typical contour house interiors, but something a bit earlier. It's built 1912, so nearly domestic representative, you could say. But which was then bought by Kaufhof, and as they couldn't demolish it, they came to a compromise to just keep the facade and bring in this 10 by 10 grid all over the whole floor surface. And also in height, you see the original section here of the roof. After the World War, Second World War, there was a temporary roof to then end, both still having light, bringing in light from both sides, to then go to this Kaufhof situation with a company that was just interested in dark, deep spaces with high ceilings, and where you see also to the left here, and the full section would show you that this is actually the situation now, floors and windows not having anything to do with each other anymore. So a number of challenges for future use. After maybe dreaming 1 or 2 days of emptying it again and bringing back the logical structure in the building, obviously we all felt that this was not the route to go. So you see here to the left a model of the facade, and in the middle a model of its structure that it's sort of dressing again. Maybe it's a city of dressing. Where we started to think of opening up that structure and bringing in daylight, and with the pressure, of course, of a developer wanting more surface, to also think about how to bring in and densify while extracting room. The front comes also with a back, and this is the Kaufhof back, where you also see that any interest in daylight and facade thinking was totally absent, so that's what you find there today. And now a number of images of our work so far, where the client is interested, and I think it's really important for the city, where basement, ground floor, and first floor become really public culture, commerce, obviously, as well. And then inside, working with that structure, we try to open it up, bring in different kinds of spaces, surrounded by a dense fabric of building, and testing now that it's been being dismantled, of how that structure with its, I think the columns start with 1.20 meters diameter on the ground floor. It's a very strong concrete structure that has been built in situ. How would it look, and what kind of space would be behind that elegant Fritz-Schumacher facade if you just work with what is there and activate it? The roughness of that outside is in sharp contrast with the discussions of that inside, in sharp contrast with the discussions of the outside, where after many versions, the city is really strict on keeping a closed roof, while of course there'll be places to work in behind it. So the copper, it will be a new copper roof with the Gauben, the dormers, following a certain larger wave than today, but then bringing back or sticking to the expression of Fritz-Schumacher during the day, allowing us in the evening to work with the let's say the dress again, the texture of the copper, to make clear that in the evening what is behind it can play out more in another expression. And this is the last slide. Today at Klopperhaus, that's how it's moving on. Thank you very much.
I have this kind of I organise a lot of lectures in London, and I always think that if people are teachers, I know they're going to give a good lecture, and these two I know are very good teachers. One of the, I have to confess, I'd never been to Hamburg before yesterday, so I'm the person in the room who probably knows the least about the subject, but I'm learning enthusiastically fast. And one of the great discoveries for me yesterday was the church, the Tower of St. Nicholas's, which was not a building I knew at all, and absolutely didn't know that it was by an English architect, by George Gilbert Scott, who's very, obviously you all know, very famous English architect, kind of responsible for St. Pancras Station in central London, among a great many churches and restorations of churches. That's Giles Gilbert Scott. That's Giles, that's the grandson. And Giles, who went on to do the Bankside Power Station that Tate Modern became. But I was struck by not only that I didn't know that this building, which was at one point apparently the tallest building in the world, was by George Gilbert Scott, but also that in building in Hamburg, he'd actually chosen to work in a German Gothic language, that he'd spent a 2-month kind of research trip acquainting himself quite late on in his career with this quite different language from the one the Gothic language that he'd been working with in Britain. So, and it's, in a sense, it sort of begs the question of when you come to another country, how do you respond? Are you trying to adopt and develop a new language in response to the culture of the architectural culture that's here, or are you coming in and representing something exotic and different from the existing culture? I mean, in a sense, Tom, when you were showing your project, it was striking that a lot of the references were to London vernacular situations, or I think it's a project which quite emphatically does want to bring a different quality to this place. Whereas Anne, perhaps you were very seduced by the possibilities of this extraordinary language that it already exists. Could you maybe both just say something a little about how you navigate that question when you come to you're presented with a commission in any new place? How much are you trying to extend an existing language or bring something new to a culture? Tom,
does this one still work? Yeah. Yep. Great. Well, I suppose it's kind of for us, maybe it's maybe more of a methodological question than an ideological question. So, when we do a project, let's say we go in with a certain number of intentions, but I suppose that maybe because of where we're coming from in London, because of the type of project we do, that you will never achieve your aims. You can have a set of intentions, but then the world will collide with them, and then stuff happens. And that's the interesting bit for us. So that's why, let's say, when we came here, we came in with, let's say, quite a sort of, a very reduced kind of background texture, which we brought in from London, saying these are some of the kind of characteristics that we're interested in. And actually, I forgot to mention, we worked then with a partner office, Schenk and Fleischhacker, here. And then once we were in the room with all the consultants, with the client, with our partner architect, suddenly you realize it's not going to happen the way you think it's going to happen, right? And then that's when there's this moment of exchange. And so it's not really about either adopting a kind of a local language, nor is it imposing something. It's sort of saying, look, we come with this kind of accent, and then these things happen. So, for example, you know, the cast iron fell off. You know, it wasn't going to happen, and lots of things didn't happen, but other things did. And I think that's, you know, in a sense, all the architecture that I showed as references in London, none of them are English. I mean, it's a sort of badly remembered Italian with a couple of trips to the Netherlands to make windows. You get back, you think you remember, but you don't, so then you make something, and then it ends up being what we call London vernacular. But it's not from there. It's from somewhere else, but it's not a direct replica. It's something that's and that's the sort of point I was trying to make about these cities, which are, let's say, maybe unlike maybe fortified cities or Bastille cities, port cities have this tendency that you get this kind of driftwood of cultural influences. And I quite like the impurity of it. So I think that was at least our kind of position.
It works, no? Yeah. While listening and thinking about your question, I think I realized now that because of having been in Hamburg before, like not as an architect, as someone looking at the architecture a lot, I think we have tried to bring the architecture from Hamburg to Flanders quite a couple of times. Trying with very simple means to make brickwork that is more plastic and plays more with the patterns and the size of the brick and the mortar, the joints, their sizes, trying to make things without cutting bricks. Suddenly when that call came, it was also maybe a moment to think like, oh, it didn't, of course, fully come to fruition in Flanders, but maybe now it's our moment to, spend a bit of time with the clinker, looking carefully at how by just changing, their positions out of the flat plane and linking them differently, what could come into being, probably. So, because we haven't managed really to export it, we were very, very happy to engage with it from within.
We should talk a little about the competition culture here, because I think it's very special, and there are a few, as I said at the beginning, I think it's a city that's been extraordinarily generous to people from other environments coming in and making contributions, and has recognized the value of that, and that's kind of fundamentally part of the competition system here, I think, which we have all of this extraordinary documentary evidence, of which we could, I guess, spend about 3 months trawling through later. I mean, maybe, Toby, if I turn to you, because you've, as I said at the beginning, you and I know each other from London when you were working in the mayor's office there, a very different sort of culture of quite risk-averse, quite difficult for even for young British architects to get kind of certainly get public commissions or and let alone for kind of practices from elsewhere to come in and make contributions. Perhaps I think you're probably quite well placed to say what's special about the competition culture and here, kind of having had a very different experience in London. Could you maybe say a bit about the contrast?
Yes, probably everyone or lots of people here know more about the long-standing culture competitions, but also the quite regulated way of doing competitions, which brings with it a whole raft of process and some very well-organized practices that are very active in Hamburg and have contributed to the making of this vast amount of intelligent information that's been presented in this exhibition. So the culture is very organized. It's quite rigid in a way, but it also allows the entries from people from all over the world in many cases, and that I think is special because it also leads to the path to executing and building buildings, which in so many other competition cultures that I've come across, ideas get collected from all over the world, but in the end the execution is very much done by the local practices. So what I enjoy is that even though you were caught in the pandemic, but that your building was built and that your designs are actually taken through the process, and that's something that I think is rather outstanding in the culture. If you commit to competition and you go with the vast effort and also all the practices that enter competitions here, I know spend a lot of money, way more than the fees can give you back in order to participate. It's a big process. It needs a lot of organization. It costs quite a bit of money, but it allows good ideas to emerge. And in London, we were often freestyling in the mayor's office. We were trying to get around the competition rules. There was this thing, European auto competitions, but the industry was trying very hard to avoid it. I'm not saying that's all the solution to all the questions around making buildings. I think there's got to be different approaches. We here have the great benefit of an Oberbaudirektor who's presides over the quality and keeps an eye on and keeps the discussions and the networks going, and is the place that often developers come to and say, how am I gonna, what am I gonna do with this building that I've just acquired? So there's a good exchange. There's a structure in the city that takes it serious, that actually wants to achieve good things. As I said, sometimes the process is almost drowningly complex and very hard to pull through, but actually in the end the results are here, and you can see that the work that is displayed is outstanding in many cases, and it benefits greatly from practices that have got a chance, that might have not worked in Hamburg before, that can come and give it a go.
I mean, Tom, I think it would be fair to say that maybe now, well, I think the project you showed was from 2015, the design, and I would think you probably would have struggled to realize a project of that scale and kind, you would have struggled to be awarded a commission of that scale and kind in London at that time in your career. I don't think I think now it would be a different story, but Britain is a very risk-averse environment, and I think that's part of the attraction for many London offices in seeking work in Hamburg or in Belgium or Norway, or it can often be a sort of transformative experience for them, that they get a work of a different scale and kind from what's been available to them previously, and then it opens up the possibility of them getting other kinds of work at home.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there was absolutely no way we could have got a housing project in the UK. Apart from anything else in the UK, they are obsessed with sort of, you could say, a kind of domain specificity. So like, we would go for projects and they would sort of say, but you do art galleries. Like, as if you do one type of project, it means that you are not capable of doing another. So it was absolutely out of the question that we could have got one. And we've struggled since with housing things. And I think that's in the UK certainly super risk averse. I think it's a pretty rotten housing culture at the moment across the board, not just for us, I think across the board. So it's incredibly refreshing when we did the competition here. I mean, it was really well organized, the documents are good. And it was very clear, once you do the competition, it's very clear that somebody's done it before you, because everything fits, and only just. If you do a competition in the UK, they'll say, we want 10,000 square meters, and then you do it, and you can go, you can only fit 3,000. Like, nobody's really thought about this. So there's this sort of background. I mean, I'm making a joke of it, but there is some sense that at lots of levels, there is a kind of a background sort of research and investigation, which means that when it comes to doing the work, you're not having to try to invent or discover stuff that's really not yours to make. It actually belongs to the kind of, to the bigger ebb and flow of the city. So that's one of the things. So it means that you have to just get on with doing the architecture, doing the apartments, doing the detailing, doing, making sure that the daylight, the acoustics, the kind of proportions, all those things that's what you're working which is really refreshing. And I think in the UK there can be good competitions, but they tend to be in the cultural sector. They're never in housing. And that's and so there are interesting projects they get, but in housing it's led by developers, it's ruled by developers, and essentially local authorities are somehow, you know, the awkward interpreters of these very powerful real estate forces. Whereas here, when we did the competition, it was actually the previous Oberbaudirektor, Jan Walter. But you know, the voice of the Oberbaudirektor in the documentation, in the character of the competition, is very striking. You know, you can feel that there is a kind of a driving idea that's, even though your brief is very specific, there's a sort of, you kind of go, okay, this is related to many other things. And that's what I think makes it very refreshing for us.
And competitions have been absolutely the lifeblood of your practice. And obviously we all look to Flanders as another place which seems to have got it right and has been very sort of accommodating of young talent and talent from elsewhere. And I know you're building a little in Switzerland as well, which similarly has a strong competition culture. Could you say a little about how what does or doesn't work so well for you here? What are the good points and bad points compared with other environments you're working in?
So in Flanders, I have to speak about Flanders now, not Belgium. Since the end of the 90s, there's been what is called a Vlaams Bouwmeester, so Bouwmeister, Flemish, working for the government with this sort of mission, lead, protect, work on high quality public buildings or buildings funded with public money. And the way they do it now since nearly 25 years is they launch twice a year a list of projects that will be open for competition, and any architect can join that. It's called an open call. So they get applications, they choose together with the client 5 that are then paid to do competition. They're well prepared, but it's true. They're not. It's not in a similar mathematical way, I would say, as here. My feeling from here is actually 2 of the 3 projects I showed are not the result of a competition. The one I couldn't show is the result of a competition. I don't know if we can make conclusions about transparency of competition here. I guess it's an exception. It's also not in the exhibition. But a difference, I think, exists, but maybe my experience is too limited in that sense, is that here a list is made of potentially interesting architects for a specific project, and then phone calls are made, rather than inviting others to, show motivation or interest, which I have always found a really amazing procedure, because, as you say, we started our own practice in early 2000, and you could twice a year you can write 300 words, no more. But they make a selection within the 5, 1 international, 2 established, and 2 young practices who never did anything with a similar brief, or we did care homes, and the client wanted no one with experience in care homes for clear reasons, with town halls, museums. So as a young practice, you really get an opportunity. That I thought that was like being in the right place at the right moment. Now it's become really much more difficult because it's so popular. That's a little bit, comparing it. It's very transparent, but it's also working mostly on public buildings or with public money. And what I find very interesting here is that in all projects, but also, of course, in the competition, this synergy from very early on between the city and the Oberbaudirektor has been mentioned, and the private client and the architect. This whole process is kind of tight, sometimes a bit too much on the back, but on the other hand, it's efficient, it's quite clear who wants what and in which direction it could steer, but the debate is open and strong. And that's something that we don't, that kind of culture of making architecture together and finding out really early on whether it will work or not, involving other administrations, heritage, obviously. I find that very impressive. Not always pleasant, but yeah, a very rich process, following up on a competition, I would say, or on, a dialogue is...
Please.
Just responding to a few points, I think the culture is benefits greatly from the influences of other people coming here and also talking and showing their projects, and there's always an import-export, as we've seen in the projects where you take ideas and bring them, and I think we greatly benefit from your outlook on and your experience in other places, and I think that's clear to anyone, the benefit that the look from abroad in a way brings to the culture. Also, there is a rigid process, but we're also with the current Oberbaudirektor been trying different ways of going about finding and coming to those ideas and solutions. At Berliner Tor, on a more master plan level, we've been inviting practices to come up with ideas and not compete with each other, just present a palette of versions for places that we could then work a master plan out of, and then not take the best low-hanging fruit, but actually take the ideas and bring them into a concept afterwards. So there's different ways of going about it, but I think you're absolutely right. The process of being a bit more organic or open through a list and a call for young practices, I think these are things that we are integrating in some of the competitions. We're just doing one for a pavilion in our Kontorhaus Viertel, where we're looking to invite a number of young practices as well, as a category, and also get the gender mix looked at, which is not a very straightforward challenge. So we're always learning, importing, and what we greatly benefit from, I think, is the look where you have studied these places with that other perspective through these other lenses and looked at the kind of cultural references, looked at beyond the brief, really. You know, you're lined through the projects and zooming out on long elevations and facades and studying and carefully kind of coming up with concepts. That's what we greatly enjoy, I think, here with an industry that perhaps, because it's all well organized and you have everything in the brief and then you just need to read that brief, sometimes you don't come out the box and you just do a building within that, and that imagination, that room to experiment is what I always think makes the projects outstanding.
Thanks, Toby. We've got about 20 minutes more. I'm going to ask one more question, then I hope there'll be some from you. But then there are some roaming mics. I just wanted to pick up on, Anne, you alluded to it, your difficulties with this this innovative floor system that you were showing, and the struggles that you might have to accommodate that within the existing standards here. My sense is that, I think, Tom, you and I were talking last night, that the culture here is very component focused. It's about the assembly of products with the warranties that come with those products. Maybe less of a craft culture than we've kind of certainly, would have been in evidence kind of in Fritz Hoger's years, or is still, in a sense, I think, kind of present in certain kinds of construction cultures in Flanders or in London. Has that been could you kind of, what's your sense of just how much have you had to accommodate what your ambitions to a very specific sort of, maybe it's more difficult for you to say because you haven't built anything, built the projects yet, but maybe perhaps I'd turn to you first, Thomas. How your work is so associated with craft and with kind of innovative ways of making. Was that a challenge?
It had its challenges, but at the same time, I mean, although some of the work, as you say, that we've done is quite highly crafted, it tends to be very specific to certain places. It's not a kind of modus operandi. Some things are really, super cheap and kind of industrialized, like Milton Keynes Gallery, for example, which is, just a cheap shed. No, there was a kind of, I would say, the first couple of months of the project after we won the competition with the client and the consultants, there was a kind of comedy of like, we'd like to do this, and everybody in the room going, din. And then we go, what's that? He goes, that's the norm for this. And he goes, we'd like to do that. And they go, din, something. And it's like, oh. And then it was almost like everybody in the room had a kind of smile on their face, which was like, what are you going to show next? And then it became a sort of dance. And then it became really interesting because there was like these sort of landmarks, regulatory landmarks, which we didn't know about, which became apparent. And then as we did this sort of exchange, they also started to know, this is what you're trying to do, and are the ways in which you can thread this through the system. And it was a really interesting process. And I have to say, hopefully I was kind of quite candid that we lost a few along the way, and there's a few more that I don't need to go into. But then others we won, and others succeeded. And I think that was, and some were technical, some were regulatory, some were financial. And there are certain bits, in the interiors where I'm a bit like, okay. But I think it's fine. And I think that we, probably the client and the consultants and our partners were probably at times very frustrated with us. We were probably at times very frustrated with them. But on the whole, we sort of got along and we knew where we wanted to get to. And so it was, I think it was also, I think I should note, it was going on exactly the same time we were doing the project in New York. And let's say the back end of it, we were doing a project in Melbourne. And then the building culture in New York is insane. I mean, essentially, everything is possible. Everything is possible today, if not tomorrow. It will be incredibly well built if you tell us how to build it. If not, it will be junk. And it's going to cost you insane amounts of money. Meanwhile, and so there's this kind of chaos going on in New York, and then this super precise, highly organized building culture in Hamburg, and we've got two groups of people in the office, some trying to work out inches and kind of, crazy Americans, and then the others somehow going through. So in the office, it was totally thrilling to have all these different building cultures, meeting at lunchtime and trying to work out how do you get something done in a place in which you are foreign is really interesting and it's really exciting.
Shall I come back to you after you've built your buildings on that?
Yeah, maybe. Well, of course, it's interesting to see. We all know the challenges we are facing. And I think in all countries, it's clear that the regulations, whether it's about how much surface to use for what, how to become, how to bring uses beyond time and place in coexistence with each other, or how to use new building techniques, is pushing boundaries that the DINs and the building regulations of all sorts don't accommodate. And this is something that is now, maybe the fact that it's developed in Switzerland, and I know they're testing it out both in Brussels and in Switzerland at this very moment as well. In Switzerland, the client then proposed to construct a mock-up, one-on-one, test it, and get it attested. And then it can go, and that willingness is here, I think. Also, I fully understand. Not there yet, or they definitely didn't manage or didn't imagine that this would be part of it. So time and money play a role, but let's see where it leads us. I think regulations will have to follow anyway, no? I think we all realize that. We can't just build on as we have been building.
Do we have any questions? There are some microphones too. On the back.
Hi, good morning, Christian here. When I saw the post on Instagram that is going to be an event about views on Hamburg from abroad, I was expecting something slightly different. And I'm wondering what your view from abroad of Hamburg was prior to actually engaging in great detail with Hamburg. And I'm not interested in, let's say, the obvious. It's more on an abstract level. What is Hamburg, or what was Hamburg from abroad?
I didn't know a great deal, so I knew about the estuary, I knew about the bricks, I knew a little bit about the Hanseatic League, and I knew about Dieter Roth Foundation and rotting chocolate.
And the Beatles.
What?
And the Beatles.
And the Beatles, of course, which then has come back since now we're working in Liverpool. And they actually used to be called the Quarrymen because Liverpool was based around stone extraction. So again, sort of part of this sort of geological thing. But almost the first thing I went to see was the Dieter Roth Foundation, which is I think it was his lawyer's house. So Dieter Roth is this amazing conceptual artist who had a lawyer who had one of these white sort of townhouses in the kind of upmarket part of town. And when he died, I think either he'd collected a lot or Dieter Roth left him all his work. Anyway, it's this incredible house full of these kind of installations and a lot of rotting chocolate. So it's got a crazy smell. And so when I first came to Hamburg, I'd sort of heard about it. I thought, I've got to see this thing. So you see essentially a kind of the white stucco Hamburg, this very sort of very nice, obviously wealthy, probably wealth coming from shipping and the port in this very nice, I guess, late 19th century parkland setting. And then this really crazy, radical artist. And that was sort of almost like the opening shot. And then after that, then you get to know little bits here and there. I think that the Philharmonie was being finished at the time. So there was a lot of buzz around that. That was a kind of big moment. Or you felt its presence. So those were the kind of, those are sort of the pieces. But you only ever, even your expectation and your first encounter is just these little pieces of a jigsaw. And it takes a long time for them to start making a kind of picture that it becomes useful. It's these little fragments, which is probably still fragmentary, actually.
Because your partner is from Hamburg? You have a kind of you have a particular focus on this city, I think.
Yeah, so there was not this moment of, visiting with a certain, as a first. Jitse, who's also here, is partner in our office. We met in London, but Jitse grew up in Hamburg as Dutch, being Dutch, anyway, before leaving here with 18. But after meeting, of course, very regularly, I would slowly be introduced to the city. And if you talk about fragments, I think for me, Hamburg is really many Hamburgs. There's many, many images that I have from the city, depending on where one would go. That said, I think my first moment of understanding that there's something like Hamburg came with reading the Zauberberg from Hans Castorp, where the young Hans Castorp is actually in the house, a trading house, I think, a house on the water, before leaving to Switzerland, to Davos. And that kind of discrete wealth and how to be discreet about wealth and history. I think that is something that through the book I came to see in let's say, the central part of the city very strongly, both through its buildings, through its clean character, this elegance of the people and their cars, but never showing off, you know. That's for me sort of one part of Hamburg. What I like very much is that I guess it's just outside this walled Neustadt. Hamburg can be very dirty and very rough, with loads of cafes and bars, and in total contrast to that controlled, you know, representation. And then what I have always enjoyed most probably is the presence of the harbor and everything that comes with it, so close to all these worlds around it. I lived in Rotterdam in the 90s, and at that moment they decided to move Smit-Tak, which is an important bagger, how do you say that in English? You know, important company with cranes and big machines on the river. They moved it outside the city, and that was like a transformative moment for the city to become something else than before. And this in Hamburg is not possible even. So also when arriving, often by car from Belgium, to drive and at night see all the cranes, and I find this is completely amazing. To then contrast to the Elbe and the Strandperle and Blankenese, you know, where people would go flâner along the river and sail from there to Denmark. So that kind of distance from the sea of 100 kilometers, I think, but still having that very maritime culture, both in harbor and leisure, and the elegance, I would say, that comes with it, and the roughness of the harbor city. I think, yeah, that's my fragment places. And now Hammerbrook, I had never been there before. It's driving there, and in this very infrastructural, bit neglected on architectural level outskirt, very close to the city. So I'm still moving around, finding out new things, but I don't know if it helps, but that's a bit my, impression.
Have we got another hand?
Yours.
Mine?
You were once.
But certainly painters as well. I have friends who studied painting here, and that's the other great. But I've recently read Craig Brown's very funny biography of the Beatles, so I do have quite fresh in my mind terrifying stories of them vomiting in their kind of shared accommodation, and so I'm sure there's a different Hamburg now. Toby.
Well, just a couple of things to add, because I've been here 3 years now, and I've previously only been to Hamburg twice. Once I met Jörn Walter and sat in his office in the old building, which has now been converted. Seen a picture of it early in the film. The map for Planner is just outstanding. The kind of mix of the city, and we've already mentioned the harbour and the port, but I think it's the fact that there's work-wise so much industry still part of the city in the mix, in the compact, in contrast to London, which is, in other cities like Berlin, which have going into a tourism industry of commerce kind of direction, and service economy. I think that's just makes Hamburg robust, and it's going to be there for thousands of years, and it will be making it through climate change, when actually I think it's been built for kind of wet climate. It gets dark, the winters are very dark, and somehow the city in the brick and the wetness looks extremely good in grey, with a grey sky as well. But then we've got the feeling that you're always on a bit of a holiday when you have that beach by the Elbe, and the incredibly green spaces. But I think what took me most was the fact that I could see some chimneys. There was some smoke coming out of the chimneys. They weren't fake ones. And you've got all these bits of industry that make the background, which for a port city, it's the only one, I think, which just sits opposite its port, and it looks at it at a kind of living and leisure and it looks back at it from a work perspective. So that's just outstanding, and made me want to move to Hamburg.
One last question before we go to work. I think we're done. Thank you so much to all three panelists, and to you for coming at this early hour. But it's a very nice experiment to do this at breakfast. I think maybe it'll be repeated. And Katja, thank you so much for putting this together, and for and you should have a look at the films that Katja mentioned, which I think it's on the Architecture Foundation YouTube site. And if there are others, it's a thing we could keep rolling with. So if any of you think there are episodes that we should be adding, then give me a shout.
Thank you very much. I just want to say thank you to our guests. It was a pleasure listening to you, listening to the discussion, seeing your wonderful projects, having you here as a guest. Thank you very much for coming to Hamburg. And also, thank you to Ellis, Woodmann, and Tobias Goevert for this wonderful cooperation. Hopefully we will have more of that. It would be great. Thank you for all of you for coming at such an early hour. We are very pleased that we were completely booked. We have one more event this week, this Thursday. Then we go on a holiday, on a summer holiday. But if someone of you want to join us for the last lecture, we invited Label Architecture from Brussels, a very interesting young office. They will talk about their school buildings. So send us an email if you would like to come. We have, I think, 5 places over. The rest is booked. So we would be happy to see you there. Have a nice day.
And thank you, Katja, for organizing the event and doing all this great work with the film. So thank you as well.